Haidong! In this video, we are going to talk about the essence of Bankuk. So you may have also seen this spelled and pronounced different ways. This is the way that I've seen it the most. This is the way that I was kind of taught with. So if you've seen Bankuk spelled different ways, it's probably the same style, but just keep that in mind. What do I mean when I mean Bankuk? At this point, you probably know the drill by now. So Bankuk is the style that you usually learn in Gumdo after you learn Yedo, right? So it goes Sangsu, two-handed sword, Yedo, short sword, or maybe one-handed sword, we don't know. And then from there to Bankuk. So you usually learn Bankuk when you are third degree going for fourth. Again, just to have another reminder, at least in terms of this channel, I'm only going to go up through Bankuk because, again, the Federation is very sensitive about anything beyond Bankuk. So let's take a look at what the Federation says about Bankuk. Nothing! Or at least very little, right? So the only thing that I've been able to tease out of, again, masters and other sources is that Bankuk just means Old Kingdom style. So unfortunately for us, that is a super generic phrase, right? So because Old Kingdom, it has a really wide range of potential dates, and swordsmanship changes quite a lot when you are the nation that's in the middle of like all the fighting, right? So what it means by Bankuk and what it means by Old Kingdom, it could mean a bunch of different things, unfortunately. So again, I like to cite my sources, so I got some ideas from this book, which I've also mentioned in the past. But what it says is like there might be some implications that the type of sword that you use might be double-edged, it might be single-edged, it might be really long, it might not be that long. There's not that much that we're really given, right? And the Federation just more or less says like, oh, just more or less keep using the swords you have been using. So they don't mention anything specific about the particular equipment used for Bankuk. So if we don't know that much about the equipment, let's go straight to the content. As usual, practice this yourself as well. But in general, so I guess one more note on the the type of sword you might be using. I do believe we're using a single-edged blade as opposed to a double-edged, mostly because we do what's called half swording. So what I mean by that is, and we've already been introduced to this, right? So more or less holding the back end of the sword, right? So we do this in Shimsong, right? So we do this shift over, swift across, cross, diagonal, right? We do this in Yedo, right? So we have this position, again, half, so it's called half swording because I'm holding it at the halfway point, right? So half swording, we go into a thrust, right? And we do this at least once, that my brain is telling me, in the Bankuk form. So Bankuk 2, where we do the deflection and doing a very similar combination to our Shimsung relative. Super quick note, I call it half swording because I stole that term from HEMA. Again, I like to show you my sources, so I stole that from HEMA. I like that term because it's very self-descriptive. I'm holding it at that halfway point. But just so you know, I am taking that terminology from HEMA. So in the previous two videos, at least about the essences, right? So the Sangsu was about 50-50, right? So my body generated half the power, the sword generated the other half. Yedo did a little bit more about the sword doing the majority of the work and my body just kind of going along for the ride. And I also mentioned, I think, in that video that Bankuk is probably going to be the opposite of Yedo. So your body is creating the torque, it's creating the power, and your sword kind of goes along for the ride. But here are a couple clips that I showed before of, again, a few combinations from Bankuk. So what are the implications of the fact that we're using our body to do a lot of twisting, right? So first of all, that seems like it doesn't matter what sort of weapon we use, because like if it's bigger, it's just going to cause a lot more damage. If it's shorter, it's just going to go faster, right? So it doesn't seem to matter so much what the weapon is, because your body is your same body, right? And whatever torque it generates will translate into something in terms of a cut. if it is a heavy, long weapon, it's going to be able to impart a lot of momentum into your opponent. And if you're talking about a shorter or lighter weapon, you're going to have a lot more speed behind it. So both of those are going to do handsome damage to your opponent. So what's really nice about Bankuk is it's sort of similar to Sangsu. It has a very wide range, although I would probably say you would get more results out of it using a longer or heavier weapon. As a brief example, with limited amount of space, hopefully I don't destroy anything, and if I do, it'll be on camera, and I'll probably get in trouble. But let's try, again, just using a bow staff or just a longer weapon with a few of the combinations from Bankuk, right? So I'm just thinking about the beginning of 4, right? So you just draw into your left pasangse, right? So if you do 1, 2, stab, that had like virtually no difference on my part, right? So I just continued to spin and whip out. The bow went pretty quick, right? So you were able to generate a lot more power just because of your torque. What I might do is with a shorter weapon, kind of show you what I mean by that, right? So if you take a look, right? So the very first movement you do is shift, right? So your body's moving, cut, right? Now what you're going to do from here, right, is you're actually going to spin into it, right? So here, notice all the twisting my body's doing. All I need to do is unwind and throw my blade out. Fun, right? And from here, you're going to twist, stab, right? So your body's able to twist around the sword, and when you unwind, the sword's going to whip out. It doesn't matter if it's a really long weapon or a really short weapon or a standard weapon. It's going to whip out with about the same power, but it's going to whip out with some pretty powerful weight behind it, right? That might mean that Bankuk was originally developed for a heavier weapon, but that's not really a hill I'm willing to die on. So like it might have been developed for, again, normal length weapons. In fact, there are actually going to be a few instances where you don't want to have a really long weapon. If you remember in Bankuk 2, where you have nice vertical strikes, if I try doing that with a bow staff, bang, right? Now that said, if I have a really heavy weapon, it doesn't matter. But for all intents and purposes, I imagine that's going to be a standard length sword, maybe a little bit on the heavier side. But again, that's not going to be nearly as important as just the content of the forearm. So because we have next to nothing in terms of information from the Federation and about the history and anything really more about Bankuk except the actual forms, I'm pretty much going to end it there in terms of history and all that fun stuff. So in the other 2 styles, I'm going to make 2 videos about it, right? So one is about more of the history and kind of like how that affects your training and stuff like that, maybe some backstory for it. And then the part 2 is going to be about like stylistic choices and stuff like that. This video is pretty much going to serve both purposes, right? So let's talk about some of the stylistic choices that Bankuk chooses. So the short one is the one we just talked about, right? So you use a lot of torque in order to generate a lot of power. At this point, we also want kind of make that differential between the cutting angles as well. So I mentioned that, again, Gumdo teaches that 45-degree angle. You can kind of actually make that less steep if you want to, if you're doing a lot of the spins and using a longer weapon. But in general, you're just going to use a lot of your torque to generate all of that power associated with this form. Additionally, so Sangsu was kind of like, again, the happy medium, right? Yedo, you had pretty decent reach if you do assume it's one-handed. For two-handed, you have just nice fluidity and nice ease of motion, right? So what does Bankuk have that really makes that style shine? The reason, and this is why I really just love Bankuk, so of the styles I've learned, I think Bankuk is my favorite. Bankuk is just so powerful, right? It is a powerhouse of a style. Like I just get excited just thinking about going through Bankuk because like you can just get raw energy from that style, right? So Sangsu, you generate half of it, right? And then Yedo, your sword does half the work. But because your body does most of the work, and then you just see all of the, the power coming from your sword, it's just so much more satisfying, right? So you kind of do a little bit of input into your body, and you see this maximum output from the sword, right? So for example, if you just kind of like spin, like that doesn't really do that much for you, right? At least in terms of like taxing your body. But if I spin and then bang, you get a lot of power from doing fairly minimal motions with your body. So this is why I really love the Bankuk style. But before I get too excited, let's talk about some other aspects as well. So one technique that's introduced to this, and this is actually one of my favorites, is the powered upper block. So what I mean by upper block, first of all, is using usually the back end of the sword to come upwards to block. But I mean, just so you kind of see what I mean, this combination is just kind of like just raw power. You also have a lot of, again, just passive blocking or passive guards, right? So usually I'm going to do it this way so you can kind of see, right? So what we just did was kind of end here. What we're going to do, so cut and then powered upper block, right? So I did it a little bit weirdly because I didn't want to hit the back wall. But again, right? So from here, cut, powered, bang, right? I'll probably slide more back in the bonsai, but I think I was really close to the wall. But that's the idea, right? So slowly, so you cut, and you notice you get this huge wind up, bang, right? So not only is that upper block really powerful, to the point that if I even hit you, I didn't even use it as a block. If I use that almost like an upward thrust, that's gonna cause a lot of damage. Even if you kind of just like stumble into it, it's gonna do something. But also, if I was trying to attack you as you're going through this combination, where and when am I gonna do it, right? There's a sword going all the way around. If I was over here, maybe. But like how, if I just see someone doing this, it's a little bit harder, right? So there's that passive defense or passive guard that's just going around you. So if I needed to, and I see you're trying to do something, I can shift and cut, right? But yeah, so this is one new technique in Bankuk that I'm just kind of in love with if it's not clear. Additionally, Bankuk is a little bit more aware of warding people off. Now this happens in all of the forms, right? So even as early as Form 2 in Sangsu, where you're warding people off. In fact, you can even, technically even in Form 1, right? So I'm warding someone off with a crosscut and then going into defense. But Bankuk kind of integrates it into its own, in the actual form itself, a little bit more. To take an extreme example, right? So if you've learned number 3 in Bankuk, right? So you just did your uppercut, and you're going to do your cross, 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 cross check, right? So that one's just getting all of your space, and then you start sniping someone. So this is something that's really good for, again, battlefields if you want to think of it that way. But this is warding someone off, snipe, ward someone off, snipe. It's a really good style for, again, keeping your ground. Now this next part is something that I have integrated into my Bankuk. It was never taught to me by a Federation person. It is something that I did myself. So you absolutely don't need to listen to this part. But it is actually a concept that we've used in the past, and that's called pommeling. Once again, I'm stealing that term from HEMA. Pommeling, all that means is shifting here, right? So that said, so you might be asking when. I don't remember learning that. You did, right? So think about how Sung say, right? So you're here, right? So bang, 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 shift, up, right? So you did learn how to pommel, right? So my right hand didn't move, but my left hand shifted. So if you take that concept and apply it to specifically Bankuk 7, it makes it so much easier, so much more effective, right? So for example, we do a lot of the overhead thrusts, right? We do parry thrust. Now, if you've ever tried to stab a target in this position, you know it hurts, right? This wristband is going to cause you damage if you really try to thrust through something hard. So what can we do, right? So we do this combination a lot in Bankuk 7. There's got to be something that can make it better. So if we do the pommeling, right? So if we're here, pommel, right? Pommel, this is not going to hurt you nearly as much. Now obviously you can still keep, something close by. But if you pommel, this is going to be much easier on your body. It's going to be more steady in terms of your aim, and it's just going to be generally easier to do that combination. So this was something that's not canonical, so if you want to throw anything out, if you have to throw anything out, this would be the one to throw out. But I do find that's very, very helpful in terms of overhead thrusts, at the very least on your left side. Speaking of stable, you might also notice that the Bankuk is a little bit more upright. So we tend to be in, so this is Taito-se, we tend to be in half Taito. So what does that mean, right? So one potential offshoot of that might be we're using a lighter weapon than Sangsu, right? Because if Sangsu is using, again, a really heavy weapon, we need these long stances to compensate and kind of make sure we don't lose our balance and stuff like that. Cool. So maybe we are using a lighter weapon, which requires us to use or not need a really deep stance. But there are other ways you can think of that as well. Another concept that you might play with is that allegedly by the time you hit Bankuk, you've been using your sword for years and years and years and years and years and years, right? So at that point, you don't need to be in a deep stance to get that same control. Allegedly, if you've been doing this and training with this and sparring with this, you can actually spar from up here, right? So I don't need to have a really deep stance to really thrust through your face. I might be able to do it from here, right? So stab to the face, right? That wasn't that powerful, but you get the idea. So allegedly at this point, you don't need the deep stances to generate the same amount of power. Additionally, this might be because of the particular style of Bankuk, right? If Bankuk is about twisting and using your torque, it's weird to do with a long stance, right? So if I'm in Taito-se, I do a twist, that's gonna be really weird, versus if it's shorter, it's a lot easier, right? So that might be yet another idea as to why the stances are a little bit shorter. These were some ideas for you to play with in terms of, like, again, kind of getting reacquainted with your Bankuk, right? So, again, some of this is not canonical. Again, all this is kind of based off the general assumption of Old Kingdom, or just from my own experience. So again, if there's anything that your master or instructor tells you that contradicts this, do what your master says. But it's just a good way to kind of get your brain going. So in that same vein, drills I would like for you to try. And you might imagine these are going to be similar to the first two videos, right? Because they all kind of have the same theme of like the essence, right? First of all, once again, I mentioned that Bankuk is all about body. Try doing it overkill, right? So try to do 100% body and just have pull like noodle arms, right? And see what happens there. Try doing the opposite. Try to move your body as little as possible and see if you can still generate the same amount of power. Try it 50-50, right? So you might find out that maybe I'm wrong, right? So maybe 50-50 is still better for Bankuk than it is for, the mostly body stuff, right? Additionally, try it with a really heavy weapon, try it with a light weapon, see how much that changes. And finally, the last drill I would like for you to try is to try stabbing a target, as in like an actual target, don't stab people, unless if you're sparring and it's consensual, but yeah. So if you have a tower target and you practice stabbing, try it without the pommeling and try it without the pommeling and try it with the pommeling, right? So pommeling just means you can shift your left hand, whatever you're doing. So try stabbing a target without pommeling, try it with pommeling, try doing weird things with the pommeling, see what happens, and just kind of see like, all right, like, at least from my own experience, I feel a lot less pain if I am going to be stabbing with pommeling. That may not be true. You might find out that it actually hurts you, might hurt maybe your palm. You might find out that it's like, all right, you mentioned that's more stable, but I feel more stable like this, and that's fine. The main idea is, again, to introduce ideas and to play with them, right? So I guess it's not going to do anything. So in that vein, the main purpose of this channel and these videos is to, again, make you, or at least give you ideas about how to become the best swordsman you can be, right? So I would like to do that primarily in terms of like, oh, I want you the best Gumdosa you can be, right? So specifically in terms of Gumdo, doesn't necessarily always have to be, right? So there are always going to be different ideas from all over the place. A sword is a sword, right? So learning how to fight with a sword should be about the same for Again, shouldn't matter the type of sword. But just keep that in mind, right? So with that, make sure you keep training and you stay humble. Haidong!